Hi, my name is Christine, and I'd like to welcome you back to Becoming Holistically Whole. This is a place where we talk about multiple things that involve our life issues and things, and mental health, physical health, spiritual well being, everything that encompasses the individual that makes them a whole person. So, we talk about how to work through some of these struggles that we may have to become that holistically whole person. Today we're going to be talking about boundaries. One of the viewers here had asked or requested that there was a video made on boundaries. So we're going to go ahead and talk about what that is, how to set boundaries, how to follow through. So what is a boundary? Well, as a mental health therapist, I have individuals who come into my office and they may come in with saying that they have struggles with communication or time management or self-care. And when we get to the root of the issue, it's usually something to do with boundaries. So a boundary is, if you think about like a garden with a white picket fence, okay? A boundary, that picket fence is that boundary that borders that garden. It says where the garden begins and it shows where the garden ends and maybe where the rest of the yard is. And usually there's a gate on that garden, and that gate usually allows you to go step into that garden. So if you think about that boundary being there to protect that garden and the gate being what you allow people to do, okay? Whether or not you allow them to come in and enter that space. So, boundaries are only as good as our ability to keep those boundaries. So sometimes when we think about setting boundaries, individuals may worry about, well, what if I make someone angry? Or what if someone no longer likes me? Or what if they get mad? That's usually a struggle with, people pleasing. You'll see that in many individuals who struggle with anxiety or don't want individuals to be upset with them. They struggle with setting boundaries. So boundaries, not only do they help to define us and our property, it also tells us what we're responsible for. I'm not responsible for your feelings. You're not responsible for mine. I'm not responsible for your behavior. You're not responsible for in individuals who struggle with some codependency issues, you will see a boundary issue there as well. Taking responsibility for other people's feelings or making sure that they're okay, putting them ahead of ourselves most of the time. So, individuals who struggle with boundaries also have a hard time saying no. If you think about the mother who is a stay-at-home, people think, oh, well, she doesn't work, or the stay-at-home dad, they don't work. So we can ask them to run the PTA or do this particular thing for school, or what have you. And, if you have a hard time saying no, then you're going to say yes to everything, leading to very little margin in your life. And that becomes a boundary issue. So we'll see as we go through what that inability to say no does. It leads us to becoming resentful and feeling overwhelmed and burnt out. So your words define your property. For others, the way you communicate to someone defines what you're willing to accept and what you're not willing to accept. So being able to speak how you feel, what you like or dislike, trying to remember that the word no and the word stop are both complete sentences. So you do have the right to say no if it's something that you don't want to participate in or it's something that you don't want to do. And if someone gets upset, that's not your issue, okay? So making and setting healthy boundaries, making that a part of your life practice helps those old patterns of behavior to no longer kind of come back into play. So let's talk about signs that you need boundaries. Well, what are some signs that you need them? Well, you feel overwhelmed. We just talked about the stay-at-home parent who everybody thinks is not working. So if you say yes to everything, pretty soon you're going to start feeling overwhelmed with the responsibilities that you have or the things that you've said yes to. And that makes you feel resentment, or could make you feel resentment toward people for asking for your help. You know, when it's an issue with you and not being able to say no. So you make comments about helping people and not getting anything in return. Okay, again, a communication breakdown there, being able to say no. You feel burnout. Can you only imagine? You're a stay at home parent, you're taking care of the children, you've said yes to all these things, places you have to run around, things you have to do. After a while, you're going to get burnout. Uh, you have no time for yourself. Obviously, if you're saying yes to everything, you don't have time for you. Right? And as we say on this channel, taking care of ourselves, self-care is a big deal. It's important for our mental and our physical health. You may be asking yourself, can I set limits and still be a loving person? Is it selfish of me to set a boundary? Um, what if someone gets upset or hurt over my boundaries? The number one reason people don't set boundaries is because they're afraid of saying no, for somebody getting upset with them. They're fearful of that. But when you think about fear, let's think about the fact that fear could be false evidence appearing real. So fear is not always factual. And if somebody's upset with you for setting a boundary, that's a them issue. It's not your issue, right? Family relationships can be the most challenging place to set boundaries. An example of somewhere where that might be a struggle is, like, let's take it could be an adult child. Let's say adult child and parent. And maybe that adult child is living on their own and they have a hard time, with their finances and stuff. And they're always coming to the parent, and the parent is always bailing them out of something. Well, you as a parent or that parent may feel that they're helping their child by not, allowing them to feel that pain of whatever they've got themselves into financially. But, you're not really helping them. You're enabling them to continue that behavior. And not only that, you're standing in the way of the work that they need to do for themselves. If you're constantly bailing them out of that financial situation, then you're standing in the way of them learning good financial stewardship. So try to remember that it's okay to say no. What about some reasons why people may not, respect your boundaries if you set them? Well, when you set a boundary, you have to be firm about what that boundary is. And you have to be consistent with that boundary. If you're wishy-washy, back and forth, you set the boundary and then you're not consistent with it, people don't take that seriously. So you don't hold people accountable. Maybe you set a boundary and you say, I'm no longer going to tolerate you speaking to me that way. And if you do speak to me that way, I'm going to do X. Well, what if that person continues to speak to you that way and you don't hold them accountable? Again, you let them get away with it. It's not a consistent thing. You don't stop it. They're not going to respect your boundaries. You apologize for setting boundaries. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to. There's no reason to apologize for setting a boundary for yourself. Be firm in your boundary that you set. Again, the example of maybe you're in a heated argument, and the example is, if you continue to yell at me, I'm going to walk away. You notice I didn't say I'm sorry, but I'll have to walk away if you continue to yell at me. No, if you continue to yell at me, I'd like to continue this discussion with you. Discussion, not yelling. But if you continue to yell at me, I'm going to have to walk away. We'll have to talk about it another time. Boundary is set, right? You allow too much flexibility in the boundary that you've set. You speak in uncertain terms. You assume that setting your boundary once is enough. It's not. You may have to remind people over and over of your boundaries. Individuals who like to step over boundaries, as I call it, they'll do it. They'll do it as often as you'll let them do it. So you may have to remind them again and again that that's a boundary that you've set for yourself. You assume that people will figure out what you want and need based on how you act when you set a boundary. People don't know what you need. They're not mind readers. You have to be able to tell them what you want, what you feel, what you are going to tolerate or not tolerate. It's okay to use your voice and speak up for yourself. So, some areas that commonly need boundaries: family, right? Could be anything. Could be a boundary with the way someone speaks to you, it could be a boundary with a child wanting money, bailing someone out. Could be anything. It could be a boundary with the family member wanting your time or not valuing your time. Work. That's a huge one that I see as well. Um, Working over 40 hours constantly. It's okay to do it every now and then when you need to, but it becomes a boundary issue when you're working 50, 60 hours a week all the time. You're bringing your laptop home from the office to continue working while you're at home. You should be taking care of yourself and engaging in self-care. Romance, okay? Putting unexpected expectations or not defined expectations on someone, wanting them to read your mind, uh, agreeing to things at the beginning of the relationship that you know that you can't follow through with later on. So if it's a relationship, friendship, make sure that those boundaries are set in place. Friendships, unhealthy friendships. Relationships and friendships they should have a feeling of give and take equally, you know? It shouldn't be always I give all the time and I get nothing in return. Again, after a while, you start to feel resentful, upset with that person. But, that's a you issue because you haven't expressed your boundaries. You haven't expressed what you will not accept. So, making sure that you start off on the right foot in those friendships or relationships. Technology. This is another big issue. Having boundaries around technology is important. Engaging in using social media or various apps, it not only affects your mental health, but it can affect your physical health, your health with your relationships. It affects you mentally when you're constantly doing all of that scrolling all the time. There's showing that there is an increase in depression and anxiety in adults and teenagers because of all of the social media. You may be comparing yourself to someone you see on social media, an influencer or someone, which starts to make you feel bad about yourself and can start a whole spiral of mental health issues. These various apps and stuff make it easier, I think, for infidelity to take place. So we have that. There's a relationship issue. Plus, it leads to mental health issues when all. If you're sitting on TikTok at night and you're not going to bed on time. I've been guilty of this myself on the TikTok rabbit hole. And if you have a bedtime of a certain time in order to get your 8 or 9 hours of sleep, and because that's healthy for you and it maintains your physical and mental health, and you fall down the TikTok rabbit hole, guess what? Now you're down to 6 hours of sleep. And there are various studies that show that lack of sleep, those 2 or 3 hours that you do not receive, affects a lot of what goes on in your brain during the night, where it's a whole reset that's supposed to happen, but all of that time is cut out because you don't have that much time. So making sure that you put limits on social media. The teenagers are sitting up at night, looking at various apps or comparing themselves to individuals, or they can't sleep without their phone. That you have to have some boundaries placed around it. Maybe it's a no electronics after 8 p.m., no electronics after 9, and then from 9 o'clock on you do something that's soothing and relaxing to help you go to bed. The last things that you look at and engage in are the things that you fall asleep with. So if it's all of this stuff that's off social media, imagine how you're processing things in the night and how you're sleeping. I don't think you would get relaxed, really good sleep. So So now that you know a little bit more about boundaries, let's talk about some of the journal prompts. You knew this was coming, right? Okay, so journal prompt. Number 1, identify if you have a boundary issue. Out of all of those things that we talked about, family, technology, relationships, do you have a boundary issue? And if you do, what is it? How are you going to communicate the need for a boundary? So if you've identified that you have a boundary issue between yourself and your partner, between yourself and a parent or child, how are you going to go about communicating that and being, firm in setting that boundary? Again, remember, not apologizing for setting a boundary, not being wishy-washy, but being firm and consistent with that boundary. How are you going to take action to communicate that need to that person? Are you going to sit them down and say, hey, we need to talk about things, and then you put this boundary in place? Might be more appropriate way to handle that. And then again, special prompt, how are you showing up for yourself today? How are you taking care of you? So there are a couple books about boundaries that might be worth reading, and I can dig further if you'd like to, but a couple of them is this book on boundaries. Now they don't have just this book on boundaries. They have boundaries for teenagers and all kinds of stuff. But this is by Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend. It's just called Boundaries. And the other one is Set Boundaries, Find Peace, a Guide to Reclaiming Yourself. So, looks like this. So these are 2 really good resources that you can use if you'd like to have more information on boundaries. If you have a question about boundaries, or you need some help, additional help in setting boundaries, just drop some information below in the comments, and I'll be sure to try to address that. But remember, again, this is a safe place for each individual. We're going to give safe place and for people to make comments or ask for what they need. So I will see you again shortly with the next video, but go ahead and set those boundaries. Let me know how you do. I'll talk to you then.